Section 3. The Plague and the 100 Years' War. In this section, you will learn 4 things. First, you will be able to describe the effects of the plague on European society. Second, you will be able to identify the causes and outcome of the 100 Years' War. Third, you will be able to explain the significance of new warfare technologies developed during the 100 Years' War. And finally, you will trace the emergence of modern European nations. Let's get started. 2 significant events will occur in Europe during the medieval times that will significantly decrease the population of Europe. One will be the 100 Years' War, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. The second is the bubonic plague. It's also known as the Black Death. It struck Europe in the 1300s. It killed about a third of the population of the continent. The disease started with a flea who jumped onto the back of a mouse, and then the flea spread the disease to the mouse, who in turn got on board a crate, and that crate started in Central Asia, and through trade made it to Europe. Then the mouse got off the crate carrying disease, and by doing so started to spread the disease throughout Europe. The victims of the bubonic plague experienced severe chills, fever, convulsions, and vomiting. Oftentimes the victims had dark spots on their skin and swollen glands. A person who was infected by the bubonic plague usually died within a few days of contracting it. Now, during this time period, for a short amount of time, wars stopped, trade declined, and a shortage in labor occurred. However, since there were fewer workers, some people started to leave the manors and migrate to cities looking for better paying jobs. When that happens, the whole feudal system started to weaken and decline. You're starting to see the Middle Ages on the tail end, starting to end, and a new era will begin. But that's only the beginning of it. The bubonic plague was just the start of that happening. The picture is an interesting picture of a bunch of kids and their teacher doing Ring Around the Rosie. Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, they all fall down. We will be doing something in class with Ring Around the Rosie. Maybe you can find out prior to that class what Ring Around the Rosie has anything to do with the bubonic plague. These 2 pictures are pictures from the plague. This one right here shows a patient with the plague. And this picture right here shows you plague doctors. They wore these special masks that had long beaks to it to protect them from the putrid air, which they believed was what spread the disease. Obviously, that is not the case, but that's what they believe. So in the snout or the beak of the mask, you would put perfumed type items in there to try to mask the smell of the dead bodies that they were coming across through the plague. During the same time the plague was happening, a war broke out between the nations of England and France. And they will fight in a war called the 100 Years' War. And the war was actually not 100 years. It was actually a little bit longer than that, probably more closely to like 125 years. But these 2 countries will fight in a war which will obviously decrease the population of Europe because of the many people who died during the war. The 100 Years' War started with a guy named William, who is from a place called Normandy, and Normandy is in the northern part of France. He was the Duke of Normandy, and he claimed to be the rightful king of England. So in 1066, he will capture England in what is now called the Norman invasions. And then eventually will become known as William the Conqueror, and he was tied to the nobility of France and with the nobility of England, and he tried to merge those 2. But over the years, tensions will grow over who had the right to actually rule either of the regions. So if we're looking at this map here, this is France, okay? This is the Normandy region right here. Here's England. And so the Norman invasions involved William moving over to England and taking it, claiming it for his own. Those tensions I mentioned boiled over in the early 1300s. England claimed territory in the southwest of France. France, in return, was supporting Scotland's claim for independence or freedom. There was also this debate over who had the right to sea travel in what we call the English Channel, which is a body of water that splits England and France. Fighting then began when the King of France tried to retake the territory that was claimed by England in southwest France. The English king responded by claiming that he was the rightful king of France, and so England attacks France in 1337. In 1428, the English will attack one of the last major strongholds for the French, a town called Orleans. There, a French peasant girl named Joan of Arc will lead the French to victory. A little background on Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc was born a peasant in France around 1412. She was a devoted Catholic. At the age of 13, she believed that religious visions were urging her to fight the English during the 100 Years' War. In 1429, she convinced Charles, the French heir to the throne, that her visions were divine. Charles made her a knight. In May of 1429, Joan led the French to victory in the battle against the English at Orleans. A year later, Joan was captured by allies of England. She was eventually executed in 1431. She was burned at the stake, as you can see in this picture here. She became a national heroine in France and was declared a saint by the Catholic Church in 1920. So by 1453, the French had driven the English out, and the war, the 100 Years' War, was finished. New weapons changed warfare in Europe and around the world. The first one is the longbow. It shot arrows with enough force to pierce a knight's armor. Europeans also took advantage of the development of gunpowder. Gunpowder was actually discovered in China, but the Europeans developed the technology into a major instrument of war. For example, cannon fire could break down a castle wall, or it could rip through a knight's armor. So these weapons, these new weapons, could easily defeat knights. So because of that, the nature of warfare is going to change dramatically over the next few hundred years. We have been talking about during the feudal times that the sizes of cities were shrinking or disappearing because more people were staying within their manors for protection. Eventually, the size of cities start to grow again because people are moving from the countryside where they were staying into the major cities for more money. They're becoming more brave about coming out of the manors, as well as the fact that things were becoming a little more safer during those feudal times. So the cities start to grow again. Towns were becoming more stable and safe, and trade was becoming more reliable. One of the reasons why this will start to happen is because of the Crusades. The Crusades actually brought about an interest in trading once again, whereas earlier it stopped because of that fear of being killed. So it's really all about the Crusades who kind of reignited that need to trade and to go to other places. Monarchies gained even more strength after the 100 Years' War. Monarchies are the rule of a king or queen in a nation. For example, the French monarchy no longer had to worry about an English claim to their throne. King Louis XIV of France, who you see pictured here, became a symbol of power for the absolute monarchs. Absolute monarchs had unlimited power. They controlled all aspects of society. Louis XIV made France one of the most powerful nations in Europe. The Middle Ages, with the development of these strong, large nations, with these strong, powerful central governments like Louis XIV and France, that's really going to bring the end to the Middle Ages. and we will start moving into a new time period, starting with the Renaissance, but it's really known as the modern times. But those large nations will help bring about the end of the Middle Ages.